Our next briefing deals with really violence against the vulnerable in our state, ranging from domestic violence, child sexual abuse, to child sex trafficking. So it's kind of a combination of all those things. First of all, you saw this information a little bit earlier, but I think it's worth reiterating. While we've had a slight drop in the number of reported cases of domestic violence so far this year compared to last year and compared to 2010, still, as Governor Haslam pointed out, domestic violence offenses make up over half of the reported violent crimes in our state. Also, the Violence Policy Center ranks Tennessee third in the nation as of 2010 for the rate at which women have been killed by men. This is up from 5th place in 2009. What I'd like to do now is call on General Wyrick, who's going to talk a little bit about repeat offenders in Shelby County, what they're doing to address this problem. Let me say that we do not have any statewide data on repeat offenders. So what we're having to do to kind of track this is look at jurisdictions that do keep that data. Shelby County does. We're working with Davidson County to get that information from Metro Nashville as well. But we don't have the statewide data. But at this point, General Wyrick.
Good morning. Thank you to Commissioner Gibbons and the Governor and everyone for putting on this very important conversation. Shelby County, always a special place with the numbers that we deal with, and I don't think we can say enough that when in the area of domestic violence alone, we are not going to arrest and prosecute our way out of this. When I look at the trials that are going on at 201 Poplar as I stand here today, one of them is a domestic violence criminal intent murder where we're waiting on a jury to come back with a verdict, where 2 of the children in the home witnessed the almost death of their mother. Another trial that is going on as I stand here is a 2-year-old who was killed by her mother's boyfriend in front of her 7-year-old brother. And in both of those trials, we as prosecutors, law enforcement, had to make the very tough decision to put those siblings on the stand, to put those young witnesses on the stand, to do our job in seeking justice. But I think what's so important and why we're all here today is to go back home and now start focusing our energies on what are we going to do to make sure that those children do not become the next set of defendants that we're all dealing with. So in Shelby County, unfortunately, the number of defendants that we are prosecuting in the area of domestic violence, the numbers keep going up on how many of those have a history of beating the ones they say I love you to. But we are very aggressively using, and thank the governor once again and everyone that had a hand in getting that legislation passed, to give us that tougher hammer and to take what we've learned in the area of DUI and start talking about mandatory minimum time for repeat domestic violence offenders. This is just a kind of a recap of takeaways from our segment on the area of domestic violence and child sexual abuse. What we want to do is what we've already done: enact the mandatory sentences, provide more support for domestic violence victims, get them out of the troubled zone, get them into a safe place, and begin that hope and healing. And I know Mr. Bill is going to talk about the importance of shelters and the importance of the family safety centers. We're very fortunate to have a brand new facility in Shelby County. And then, of course, increase the awareness of child sexual abuse. All of you on the front lines know how often the lines blur when we talk about domestic violence and child sexual abuse, because far too often a home that we may respond to a domestic violence crime is also a home where there's child sexual abuse going on, and vice versa. And this, just for those of you that are not familiar with the exact hammer that we have been given by the legislature to help us fight this fight, gives us an outline of what these repeat domestic violence offenders are looking at, so that we can, first of all, continue to send that message that we're taking this very seriously, that this is a public health issue when we're talking about domestic violence. I think just in Shelby County alone, my domestic violence prosecution vertical unit consists of 10 prosecutors, and they've already inherited close to 7,000 new cases this calendar year. Those are staggering numbers, and hopefully this legislation will start to see those numbers go down, because we're going to hold these offenders accountable for a longer time, and hopefully we're going to see some deterrence. And with that, I will turn it over to the family safety and shelter expert, Bill Scollin.
Thank you, General Wyrick. Last week, the nation witnessed, through the media, another act of domestic violence turned fatal with the NFL player who murdered his girlfriend. General Wyrick also identified a couple of cases pending in Shelby County. Unfortunately, this happens all too often in the state of Tennessee. Last year in 2011, 107 cases of homicide were attributable to cases of domestic violence. In addition to that, over 10,700 cases of aggravated assault were attributable to domestic violence. We went through, Commissioner Gibbons went through the slides, the statistics regarding domestic violence, and one thing that should hit us all is this statistic that over half of all violent crime against the person is attributable to domestic violence. We're talking about simple assault, intimidation, stalking, but we're also talking about kidnapping, aggravated assault, sexual assault, and murder. But these are just numbers. There are people involved behind these numbers, and they are only the numbers that get reported to law enforcement. Unfortunately, domestic violence often involves years and years of emotional and psychological trauma to the victim, in addition to the physical injuries the victim sustains. And think about the long-term exposure this has to the intended victim as well as the unintended victim, the children. Fortunately, Tennessee has a lot of good people working in the area of domestic violence. And our shelters do a great job, and they save lives as well as rebuild lives. They deal with this trauma and the immediate needs of the domestic violence victim in these shelters, as well as the long-term needs. The Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence is the lead agency in the state with as far as training in the area of domestic and sexual violence is concerned. And as such, the Office of Criminal Justice Programs has teamed up with the coalition to help deliver additional training to domestic violence shelters, and in particular, their lead staff, their directors. In the near future, training will be delivered to the leadership training will be delivered to the directors of the domestic violence shelters on topics such as trauma-informed care for victims of domestic violence who also suffer mental illness and drug and alcohol issues, and then another topic area of self-care for the domestic violence workers themselves, who end up working with the domestic violence victims and subsequently suffer burnout. Again, these domestic violence shelters work with little funding and do an excellent job in the state. Additionally, the coalition will be working with the Office of Criminal Justice Programs as well as Tennessee Law Enforcement Training Academy to help deliver training to law enforcement officers. We all know that successful arrest and prosecution of domestic violence cases often depend on the knowledge and expertise and skill of the investigating officer. And these attributes can be improved with classroom and practical exercise. So again, in the near future, the coalition will be working with Toledo to develop and deliver a 40 to 48 hour class for law enforcement officers to train them in investigative techniques, updating on legal issues, proper service of orders of protection, and officer and victim survival techniques. This training, again, is intended to be delivered by Tennessee Coalition. See if I get this right there. Okay. Now, with regards to the Family Justice Centers, the Family Justice Center approach is a best practice in the field of domestic violence intervention, according to the Department of Justice. The Model Family Justice Center is a multidisciplinary team effort of professionals working together under one roof to help deliver services to victims. And a Family Justice Center model can contain a variety of partners, but the key partners include law enforcement, prosecutors, civil legal assistance, social services, and victim advocates. The core concept is to provide one place where a victim can come in and talk to an advocate and help develop a safety plan for that victim. Additionally, the victim will be referred to medical services if need to, shelter services, services for transportation and that kind of thing. Also at that same location, they will be able to speak with the officer, an officer, about investigating the crime, as well as a prosecutor in the subsequent prosecution of that case. Why take this approach? According to the Department of Justice, more specifically the Office of Violence Against Women, the following outcomes have been found from jurisdictions that use a Family Justice Center approach. A reduction in homicides, an increase in victim safety, increased autonomy and empowerment of the victims, an increase in efficiency and cooperation of the services provided, and finally a reduced recanting of testimony and minimization by the victim. And as we all know, that will bring a better case to court. So the intention is for the Office of Criminal Justice Programs to work with and continue working with the Family Justice Centers that are already in place in the state. The two in place are the Family Justice Center in Knoxville, Family Safety Center in Memphis and Shelby County. Two great programs. We'll continue to support those and expand where possible in the state. The intention is to expand to at least 3 jurisdictions, more if possible, to expand this model program as far as possible. Those sites, those new sites, the 3 sites or more, have not been identified, but we look towards victim service agencies and government to help us identify where those locations might be.
As you know, the lines blur when we start talking about the home, and domestic violence encompasses so much more than just the grisly homicide cases that far too many of our offices handle, where a boyfriend kills a girlfriend. What we also see happening in our homes is far too much abuse against our most vulnerable and most valuable resource, our children. All of you know child sexual abuse is epidemic. I see my good friend Nancy Williams in the audience from our Child Advocacy Center in Memphis and Shelby County. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be and are sexually abused by the age of 18. It's a staggering figure, I know, every time you hear it. It is truly a public health crisis, and just like the domestic violence that rips our headlines, it is not an issue that we are going to arrest and prosecute our way out of. What we have to do is begin doing more of what we're doing today and getting together and finding out how we can, first of all, educate and make everyone aware of what we all know to be the reality, and then what we can do to prevent that next generation of coming through the doors of the child advocacy centers and the 201 Poplars across the state of Tennessee. So how do we do it? Training, 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 talking, educating. I would imagine if you were to walk into an event this weekend and throw out the statistic that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused by the time they're 18, most of your friends and colleagues outside of the public safety hat that you wear would be shocked to find that out. But we have to begin that conversation. Training 5% of Tennessee adults is one of the goals. 250,000 Tennesseans. We are blessed in Memphis and Shelby County. Mayor Wharton is here, and Mayor Goldsworthy with the City of Germantown. Our leadership in Memphis and Shelby County has mandated that municipal employees participate in some form of training on the topic of child sexual abuse. And that's a huge, huge step in the right direction to, first of all, begin that conversation and to get people trained and talking about the topic and what do we do to cut down the numbers. So the training focuses on that, recognizing it, preventing it, and we also, again, the lines blur when we start talking about child sexual abuse. Of course, we have to start talking about the trend and the disturbing trend of human sex trafficking that we are seeing statewide. Again, we've been very busy in Memphis and Shelby County this week. I don't know how many of you have been following the federal trial in the Western District of Tennessee of a wonderful citizen by the name of T-Rex, who for years and years and years beat and kidnapped and abused and forced women into a sex slave trade. He was convicted yesterday by that jury in the Western District of Tennessee. I know Aaron Ford from our FBI is here, and his agents helped work on that case out of Ed Stanton's office. But it's ripped from the headlines. It's been going on this week, and it's one of those criminal cases that as it unfolded, every time you read a segment, you thought you couldn't make this up if you had to. And unfortunately, 10 citizens of our state were victims of it. 2 of those were children. And this defendant had forced the mother of his own children into this line of work, kept them in dog cages, beat them beyond belief, and was going to then put his own daughters into this industry. Fortunately, we got him, and he's looking at life in the federal system. So the goal is to establish a working group by the year end, and who's working on that? Our wonderful friends in the TBI, Department of Children's Services, child advocacy centers across the state, and the Trafficking in America groups that are helping us get the numbers out, get the conversation started, and get people educated on the problem, and that it's not just a problem across the seas, it's a problem here within our state, and what are we doing on that front. There are a couple of great ways to get the training. For those of you that have child advocacy centers in your jurisdiction that provide stewards of children, it is a wonderful training. By show of hands, how many of you in the room have participated in the stewards of children training or some other child sex abuse training? All right. I'll take off my DA hat and put on my mother of 4 hat and make this plug. I participated in the Stewards of Children training a few months ago. I've been a prosecutor for 21 years, and as a mother of 4, I've seen a lot and heard a lot and handled some of the worst offenders. I learned quite a bit about the topic of child sexual abuse, and so if you can take a grumpy old prosecutor and teach them a few things, that's a pretty successful training session. So if you have not taken it, if you're a parent, if you're a grandparent, if you have kids that live next door, if you go to church where there are kids, I strongly encourage you to devote 3 hours to Stewards of Children or some other program on the topic of child sexual abuse, and your eyes will be opened. The target audiences, again, is anybody and everybody who's around children, who work with children on a daily basis, who are on the front lines responding to the homes. Of course, our officers, of course, our friends in the community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, youth groups, clubs, parents, anybody and everybody, so that we can, again, begin the conversation. And you can't have a successful conversation if you're not slightly enlightened on the topic. And so this is a great opportunity to look at things in a different way and be exposed to the topic, maybe in a way that you're not used to, depending on what hat you wear 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Daycare centers, obviously, and after-school programs. It's open to anyone, and I think we need to, as leaders in our community and as part of this conversation, go back home and encourage our employees, our friends and colleagues to participate in the training. It is evidence-based, and it does all of those things that we've talked about. It's disturbing, of course, but we can handle that. And we do that day in and day out. And the bottom line is to get as many Tennesseans educated on the topic and hopefully reach that tipping point and cut down, again, on the number of kids that have to walk through the doors of a child advocacy center or come into 201 Poplar and take the stand in a courtroom full of strangers. Again, just another plug for that program, Stewards of Children, that is implemented by our child advocacy centers across the state. This is who has been reached. 10% of our churches and synagogues, 12% of our youth servicing agencies, 21% of our daycares and school colleges, 17% government law enforcement, and 40% of our parents and community groups. So hopefully, if we gather a year from now, those numbers will just continue to grow, and more eyes and ears will be open to this very important topic.
This is the second fastest growing crime in America.
This is a $32 billion industry, which will now supersede drugs and narcotics.
It's become the second largest crime in the United States of America.
There's billions upon billions of dollars of profit to be made in trafficking.
Very few people of Tennessee realize that this past year, 4,000 young people were drawn into the sex trafficking trade. And these are lives that will never be the same.
Most people aren't even aware that it's happening in the United States, let alone their own neighborhoods in the state of Tennessee.
Here in the United States of America, we are the largest consumers.
Again, this very timely topic. Again, if you've been following the headlines in Memphis or even in your own jurisdictions, it is a problem that we are all dealing with. One of the things I think that will help us tremendously is that we no longer criminalize our juvenile prostitution defendants. You know, for many years, they were treated all lumped in together. And I think when we began getting together and having these conversations and getting outside of our offices and realizing that that wasn't helping us get to the T-Rexes in the state of Tennessee, it's a great legislative step in the right direction. And by taking these juveniles that are picked up on prostitution cases and looking at them in a different way, and trying to then go after the T-Rexes and those across the state that are forcing them into this lifestyle, that's where we need to be spending our very precious resources so that we can get them behind bars for 15 to life. All of you, again, know that most of these young women that get caught up in the human trafficking and the sex slave have more than likely come from homes where they were either sexually and or physically abused. So this also underscores the important job that we have in front of us to cut down on those number of kids. I was at home late one Friday night a couple of weeks ago, and I got a text message from my chief prosecutor of my special victims unit, and she said, "We've just charged a 15-year-old with aggravated sexual battery." And I texted back and I said, "Well, I'd like to say that that's unusual, but why are you letting me know that?" And she said 2 weeks ago, we took this 15-year-old out of her home. She was being sexually abused by her mother's boyfriend, and we had to remove her from that horrible environment and get her into a safe place. We put her into foster care, and now she is acting out and has been convicted, or been charged rather, with aggravated sexual battery against children in the foster home. So that to me illustrates very poignantly the cycle that we deal with and the importance of cutting down on these number of children who go through this. And those are the children that these predators prey on. They find them, they stumble upon them, they seek them out, and the next thing we know, we have the rip from the headlines forcing women to live in dog cages and beating them profusely if they don't perform a certain number of sex acts a day and bring in a certain amount of money every day. So it is a very timely topic, and one that, first of all, I think we have a responsibility to go back home and educate that it is here and within the borders of our state. This was a study that was done by the TBI and the Vanderbilt Center for Community Studies on this topic, and the question was basically posed to courts, law enforcement, community-based organizations, social services, guardians ad litem, everybody that wears a hat that has anything to do with these very important topics dealing with our children in the state of Tennessee. And the question was basically, are you adequately trained and prepared to handle human trafficking cases? The top 4 counties in terms of size are the biggest slices of the pie in terms of the number of agencies that responded to the survey. The other, that being, of course, Davidson, Shelby, Hamilton, and Knox. And then the survey responses are at the bottom, giving you what these different areas that deal with this important issue, what their answers were. So as I know Commissioner Gibbons commented when we started, we have some work to do in this area to make sure that we and the offices that we work in are adequately prepared to handle and hold accountable these offenders. Cases of human sex trafficking of minors statewide, the yellow that you see on the map of the state of Tennessee are the jurisdictions that reported over 100 cases. I believe the reporting area time period was 2009 to 2010. Yes. And again, those are highlighted in yellow on the map. The green jurisdictions reported 51 to 100 cases of human sex trafficking in their areas. Red is 25 to 50, 15 to 25 for purple, 6 to 15 for blue, and 1 to 5 for the orange color. 68 counties representing 72% of the total counties of the state reported at least one case of human trafficking. And again, this is one of those crimes that when you start to prosecute it, you begin to realize how many other crimes are involved and what all is lying underneath the surface. But the 4 counties that reported more than 100 cases of human trafficking were Shelby, Davidson, Coffee, and Knox counties. Over 19,000 registered sex offenders in the state of Tennessee as of November 2012. On any given day, 65 to 70% of the registrants are registered for an offense against a minor. And again, getting back to the very important topic of training, 2,500 first responders have been trained by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation alone just since August of 2011 to begin that very important conversation and to then take what we've learned, put it into action, hold people accountable. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, General Wyrick. I want to add one thing. Bill Scollin mentioned that we did have some state support for family safety centers, the ones that exist now as well as new ones. I want to kind of reiterate that because it's an important part of the action plan. President Reagan once said that the most terrifying words in the English language were, "I'm with the government and I'm here to help you." And I'm sure all of us have experienced that. But in the case of Bill Scotland, yes, he's with the government, but what he was saying is that he's here to help you with some funding if you are interested in a family justice center. So we're ready to help those communities that want to do that. But it's really up to you to contact us and say, yes, we're interested, then we'll work with you to try to make sure that you can get the right parties at the table and begin that process. That's what we did in Knoxville, that's what we did in Memphis, and we're prepared to do that in other communities of this state as well.